3617, respond to report of shots fired.
The Coroner Talk podcast takes you behind the scenes with coroners, clinicians, and death investigators from around the world to provide training, news, and interviews from leading experts in the area of death investigation and scene management, bringing real stories and solid training together in one source. Now, here's your host, Darren Dake.
Well, hello and welcome to this week's episode of Coroner Talk. I'm so happy that you've jumped in with us again. So as this comes out live, it is the first part of February 2024. And just a quick reminder, the March session of Medicolegal Death Investigator class, the 40-hour class, is in March. So if you've wanted to go to that and you've not enrolled, we've got several already enrolled. You need to probably jump on that fairly quickly. So today's topic, we're going to talk about hoarding. We've talked about hoarding years ago, but hoarding can have a lot of dangers to it for us as investigators. We also want to understand what hoarding is. So is a collector a hoarder? Is just by virtue of having a lot of stuff in your house, you're a hoarder? So I've got a psychologist on the line today, and we're going to talk about what is a hoarder, what's the difference between collectors and hoarders, and we'll talk a little bit about the dangers to us going into an environment of hoarding. Now, to get more information on that, you can go to coronertalk.com on that hoarding episode and read more about the dangers. So there's several things there in article form that you can read about more than what we spoke on this podcast. So you can listen to the podcast, but also if you go to the website, you can obviously see a lot more and read the article form. So this is a bit longer episode. So without any delay, let's get into that conversation with Dr. Michelle.
Adjust your earbuds, turn up those speakers, and hang on. It's now time for this week's featured conversation.
All right, I'm back, and as I introduced a little bit ago, I got Dr. Michelle Doscher on the phone with me, and today we're going to talk about hoarding, which I did introduce some. But Dr. Doscher, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So, I kind of introduced you some, and you've got a lot of background, and you deal in a lot of things forensically, and of course, I gotta say, I love your website, Mind Sleuth, because that just says it all. You are a detective of the mind, I think, in all things that you do.
Well, I'd like to think so.
But today, I want to talk about hoarding, and I want to, there's some specific cases that I kind of want to give examples to, and you can weigh into. But we deal with hoarding situations on our end from police, law enforcement, and death investigation. But let's start down at the basics. What causes someone to be a hoarder? And I'm not necessarily talking about the fact that they like books and all of a sudden they got lots of books. I'm talking about the hoarding behavior that you can't even move around their house. What causes that type of behavior? And is it just a behavior or is it a psychological issue?
Well, it actually is a disorder. It is defined as a disorder, and it is related to obsessive compulsive disorder. Now, as far as your question, what causes a person to start hoarding? And I hate to sound this way, but there's so many things that we don't exactly know specifically what causes it. However, we do know that a person can experience some type of traumatic event in their life, extremely stressful, and it may just basically exacerbate that hoarding tendency. So to say is they might have already had some tendencies, and then they go through a traumatic period in their life, and then voila, all of a sudden they find themselves hoarding. Unfortunately, most people don't immediately go to a doctor or a psychiatrist or psychologist and say, you know what, I think I've developed a problem. I like to buy stuff all the time. It's not really anything I need, but I just like to buy stuff, and then I can't get rid of it. And, my spouse has asked me, my children have asked me, but I just can't let go of it. People typically do not go in and say that. It's not until perhaps, in your case, you go into a residence and you look around going, oh my gosh, how did this person live like this? And that's the thing that differentiates hoarders from collectors. A hoarder will keep collecting, and they'll have things placed on tables, chairs, their beds, down hallways, upstairs. And, one of the things that I know investigating crime scenes, I've walked in going, how did this person live? How did they function? How did they eat? The conditions eventually become extremely unsanitary. It gets to the point that sometimes they can't even use their appliances. And, we wonder, how does a person get like this? Well, it goes back to your original question. What possibly happened? Is there something else? Yes, usually, for instance, they might have a major depressive disorder or anxiety, whether it be social anxiety or generalized anxiety. They spend a lot of time where? Inside their house. They don't go out. How do they stay connected? They purchase, they buy, things are delivered. You see, it's kind of like a cycle. It's almost like one thing just kind of leads to the next.
Well, and that does make sense to me, but there are some examples that I have, is my wife's grandmother. Now, she's passed away now, but my wife's grandmother, the upstairs of the house was immaculate, and that's an understatement. It was immaculate. But the basement was full. But if she would have bread bags full of bread ties, she had jars and cans and things, and she would have strips of cloth and things. She was a child of the Depression, and she knew that these things were valuable at some point. And she, now I'm not going to say she didn't have some form of organization. She just had a lot of organization, and it took forever to clean that basement out. Now, that wasn't upstairs. Now, she lived very, very nice. But I think that is a form of hoarding. Am I right? In that they're looking at oh my gosh, what if the Depression happens again? I might need these things.
Well, Darren, unfortunately, clinically, they would say no, because one of the specifiers that it doesn't meet is it was not impeding on her daily life. It was not in her active area of living. So it would not technically be considered a disorder that's affecting her biologically, psychologically, and socially.
Okay, very good. So, that's a very good teaching point. I would have thought that, and that's very interesting.
Well, and the fact, too, that, like you said, she was organized in the sense of the way that she hoarded, okay? She had her twisty ties. She had her bags. Hoarders don't organize. They're very disorganized people. They just can't get organized. They're very indecisive. They can't stick with something. They flip-flop around. But then here's the funny thing. They tend to be perfectionists. So, try to wrap your head around that one. They're perfectionists. Right. What are they perfecting? Well, they know in their minds, I've got to acquire more. I've got to, whether it's for utility purposes, very rarely is it for aesthetic value or collecting value. It's usually utility. So that's kind of where the OCD comes in. And maybe that's where, you were kind of connecting your mother-in-law with this. Was I know way back when, these items would have come in handy. What if I get in that situation again? Do I need these? Should I keep these? I've also heard where they talk about a person just gets in their head that, like, what if my identity? What if it goes away? What if I no longer exist? Is somebody going to forget about me? And they will start keeping everything that has their name on it. I'm talking utility bills, magazines that have the labels, and they stack them everywhere.
Very interesting. Now a foster child, for instance, that might be hoarding food because, they're in a good environment now, but they used to not be, so they're hoarding food. That's not really considered hoarding either, right? If by that's just a self-preservation type of a thing. But we call it hoarding food, but that's not really the definition of hoarding we're talking about.
No, exactly. Right.
So what creates the piles of unusable items? Literally household garbage. I mean, there's
but that's not garbage to them, though. See, that's the thing. And in extreme instances where you have extreme hoarders, they collect some really bizarre things. Excrement, nails. I mean, I'm talking fingernails, clippings, hair, okay, rotten food.
Wow.
They can't let go of it.
So what would differentiate, what would be the difference between a hoarder and a house where, and I'll just give you a real life example, a house where, there's only 2 rooms that you could even pass through. One of the rooms, though, is full of trash bags. They just throw it in the room, and they're just trash bags, just everything that they would throw away normally or burn. And then there's dogs all over the house, and of course there's feces and urine, and the floor is just sop and soaky, and they live in that. Now, that's not necessarily hoarding. That's just a mental disorder to live in that type of filth, or is it borderline?
Well, there's also animal hoarders. So if you're talking about a house that you just mentioned, if there are a lot of animals in there, if they're basically starving, they're not being taken care of, they're not being kept clean, and possibly you might have found dead animals. I've run across that before. It doesn't matter if they're alive or dead. They can't let go. I mean, that's part of the hoarding. It's a two-sided. One, we got to acquire, we got to have more, we got to get more of this. And 2, you can't let it go. And that's the same thing with, the food, the rotting food. But now, like you said, you walk into a house, okay, it's dirty, and there's just trash bags here and there, thrown around, it hasn't been cleaned up. Is that hoarding? Well, one of the factors would be, okay, are there chairs that you can sit in? Is there a bed the person can go to bed in? Can they use their kitchen stove? If not, if there's piles of stuff in the chairs, on the stove, in the bed, then it has impeded into their active areas. Therefore, that's one of the specifiers that differentiates a hoarder and someone that's just not a good housekeeper.
Yeah, an extremely poor housekeeper or or a hoarder. And so that makes good sense. But let's talk a little bit about some environmental dangers that both sides. But first, let's talk about the victim in this case, or the homeowner. What type of environmental dangers have you seen that they will experience living in that type of environment?
For instance, falling downstairs. You might have an elderly person. And the reason I say elderly is because you can start hoarding at preteen ages, 10, 11, 12 years old. But what they have found is incrementally, every decade of life, the hoarding gets extremely more intense, to the point that that's typically why, that's when people notice it, is when, someone has passed. They go into the home, they find them, and they find the condition that they're living in. Well, this didn't just start overnight. Chances are it's been going on for 40, 50 plus years. Okay? So, yes, I've run across that before, where an elderly person actually fell down some stairs because of the stairs. There was stuff piled all up and down the stairs. Hallways, you could barely go through there. There's been people that died, quote, of natural causes, or so I was told, but they were elderly. They were in an environment living by themselves. But then, like we mentioned, too, you look in the kitchen. The refrigerator may or may not have been even running. Open it up, when there's mold and there's rotten food in there and just packed. What were they living on? How were they living? If there were animals in the house, typically, more diseases, very, very unsanitary conditions. So, yeah, these all have a factor.
So let me back up just for a minute, just not only for my clarification, but also for the listeners. One of the things, if I understand you correctly, that makes it a hoarding situation is when it gets to the point that they don't have livable surfaces, chairs, tables, things like that, but and may or may not have working refrigerators, things like that. But if it's just an issue of I mean, I've been in a lot of houses where I would call it a hoarder, but of course, by your definition, it may not be, because that's what I'm trying to make sure our listeners understand, because we go in the house and say, oh, that's a hoarder. Well, no, not really, if there's livable spaces. But, I've seen houses where the refrigerator quits working and the well goes out, and they don't even take the time to fix the well or try to fix the well or nothing. And of course, tissue paper, toilet paper is piled up in the bathroom and bathtub, and they live out of a cooler. They don't fix a refrigerator. And I mean, that's more of a psychological issue than a hoarder issue if there's usable space, even though it's trash and messy and full of stuff. Or is that a fine line?
There's a very fine line. But if there's still livable, usable space, I've been in homes before that there was actually no running water in the house, and they were living in the house, though. There was a space for a bed. There were a couple of chairs. It was dirty, filthy, yes, but you didn't literally have piles of items just stacked along the walls, on top of the tables, on top of the chairs. And like you said, to make sure that everyone understands, we're not talking about grandma's house that she's lived in for 70 years and now the back 2 bedrooms that no one, ever comes to visit. They're just more or less storage rooms. We're not talking about the basement that you go into or the attic that is just cluttered because kids, have parent stuff and grandparent stuff. Yeah, that's definitely not hoarding.
But hoarding gets to a point where it may start out with just 1 bedroom, but over time now it impeded the entire house. At one time I'd say maybe my garage, you call me hoarder because I schemed to kept everything. But that's really not. I'm just trying to. I might need it, right? I might need it. That's the excuse of a hoarder. I might need it. But anyway, we got that cleaned out. But there again, there's a psychological issue comes in. When they're not seeing it, or do they see it? I mean, do they know this is a problem and they can't help it, or are they justifying it and to them it's not a problem, they are working through it?
When it is not an extreme case, and like you said, possibly early on in the phase, yes, they know that they have a problem. Some of them do. Okay, yes, I constantly order stuff off the internet, or I'm always watching the TV shows and I'm ordering stuff off the TV shows. And then I just can't get rid of this stuff, Well, here, I'll take some. Well, no, I don't mean that I can't get rid of it. I mean, I just can't let go of it. Okay. Or you have, the other person who you ask them, why do you have all these credit cards? You're running up your credit cards. Why are you constantly ordering stuff? Well, I needed that. I'm not just, arbitrarily ordering stuff. I mean, I'm ordering things that I need and I can use. Okay, they're not admitting that they have a problem. Okay, well, why don't we take some of this or sell some of these items, or why don't you have a yard sale, or let's Goodwill it? Well, no, this is not a good time. I'm not ready to do that right now. Okay, they're not admitting. But, this, on the other hand, cannot be confused with someone, let's say, that has had traumatic brain injury, or someone that has some type of debilitating disease that is affecting, their cognitive abilities. Or we're not talking about someone who is in early stages of Alzheimer's or vascular dementia. No, they will have, quote, some hoarding tendencies, but that's a result of their disability or their disease, not a mental disorder.
But hoarding, it's in and of itself, is generally a mental disorder that is brought on many times by something else. Is that how I'm understanding it?
Yes, possibly by traumatic events or extreme stress. And the thing is some of the people that, actually realize that, okay, I do have a problem, it's not until they start looking back and they're going through, some therapy that, oh my gosh, you know what? Now I remember when I started acquiring this. But unfortunately, the majority of them, they never do go and talk to anybody because they don't realize it gets so bad that they don't realize that they have a problem. Or maybe a family member's consider it's a possibility, they don't want to upset the person, or the person refuses to go talk to anybody. What few instances, a lot of times that they've been diagnosed, is the person is actually talking to someone, a doctor or, a psychologist for something else. And, here's the key. Just because a person comes in and says, I can't go out the door unless I turn it 5 times before I leave. I have to wash my hands. I have to do this before I do this. I have to do these things in these steps. Okay, we're talking obsessive compulsive disorder. Well, less than 20% of people with OCD actually have some hoarding tendencies. But they tend to be kind of the bizarre type that I mentioned earlier. So it's not unless a doctor starts asking them about some other issues that they can possibly key in on that. And one of the issues would be, okay, OCD, they typically do not buy things in excess. However, they might start collecting things, like we mentioned, newspapers, utility bills, magazines, freebies stuff. You see pamphlets or flyers, and then they can't get rid of it. So that's another form.
So some of this
hoarding.
is brought on by comfort, or brought on for comfort?
I think so. I really do, because from what you read and what you hear other people talking about, yeah, it's almost like you said, a comfort thing. Going back to when you were talking about someone living through the Depression, okay? They know that we're not in a depression right now. They've lived through it. But just knowing that they have it just in case, it gives them that comfort.
Right, and I guess,
So what if?
And we've seen and heard those who buy stuffed animals or dolls or collect books, and there's, the books, you can't even get around the house for the books. They don't even know what kind of books they've got, but somehow those books are giving them some sense of security or comfort because it's something that they're interested in, and they have plans for them, right? But the plans never get done.
Right, and that's more so too with the collectors. They have plans for them versus just it's giving some sort of comfort. Your hoarders typically don't really have plans. Like I said, some things that they're purchasing, and they're usually not necessarily big ticket items. It may be that they order, 6 packs of underwear every other, month or something. It may be just something simple as, nail files. You can't have enough nail files. They don't really have a use other than they think, okay, I can use them or I need them. Versus, this is a pretty doll. I'd like to collect these. Now I have 200 of them. Okay, but they're very organized. We have them in a certain place. We showcase them. A hoarder doesn't showcase. Things aren't organized. They're just lying around, and then eventually, if it continues, then we go to the piles, and then we go, to the impeded active living spaces.
But a collector, let's say it is books or clothes or whatever, and they're collecting these things, even if they have a plan and they think they have some type of a system, once it gets towards impeding the flow of their house, does that switch over to hoarder definition? Or if they still have a mental capacity of, I'm categorizing this, I have a plan, even though they never carried out. And I guess what I'm asking is and maybe we could never do that. It takes someone like you, but if we walk into a house, we're going to call it a hoarder, obviously, because it's all full. But where does a collector and a hoarder, where does that line break when in fact they really are doing kind of the same thing, except one thinks they have a plan and the other one don't even have a plan at all?
Yeah, a true collector is typically going to be somebody that knows specifically what they're going to be wanting a certain type of something. A hoarder, there isn't a certain type. It may be nail files this week. It may be, magazines that we just continually keep, or it may be underwear the next week. It may be hairbrushes. It may be pots and pans, and it may start off, this impulsive buying, because they're also very impulsive. Okay. So, and then they're giving stuff away to people, and then eventually maybe something happens. We don't necessarily understand it, but obviously something goes on in the mind, something clicks, and they no longer can let go. Collectors a lot of times will buy, sell, trade, hoarders, they don't let go of it. They're not getting rid of it, no matter what.
So a collector may be out of control. They may have more stuff than they can actually buy, sell, and trade because they've collected too much. But still, yet they're more. But psychologically, they're totally different as well, right? A collector is just
right.
They're collecting and they're buying and selling and trading, and even though it's out of control, it's not caused from the same psychological reason. Right?
No, and you ask a collector, exactly, and you ask a collector, tell me about this. They're going to be able to tell you about just about everything that they've purchased over the years, okay? They're going to have notes or mental notes. They're going to remember. You ask a hoarder, you point to a pile down a hallway or a pile next to the toilet, just really weird places. What's this here for? Well, I need it.
Right.
You may not get a clear-cut answer.
Right.
I don't touch that. Okay, well, can I move this so I can sit in the chair? Well, why don't you sit over here? Or, that sort of thing.
Right. And then from our perspective, walking into a house, law enforcement, EMS, things like that, we are not going to know the difference. I mean, just at least off the cuff, we may not, because it's still going to be full. But back to our environmental issues, what we face as first responders, law enforcement, things like that, is going into these houses. Not only do we have fall risk, we have collapse, avalanche, of items, but then also if you got the hoarders that's got the garbage and the dogs and things like that, that's an environmental issue that they need to consider what they're stepping in, breathing, moving, because that can be very dangerous as well. Correct?
Exactly, because you don't know how long things have been there, and you don't necessarily know what they are hoarding, okay? When I say bizarre, I just named a few things. Sometimes people, when I mentioned excrement, I have heard of literally a bathroom turned into a shrine for excrement, okay? That's not sanitary.
That's got to be a psychological issue, though, right, Doctor?
Yes.
If they're putting now, let's say though that their toilet isn't working, okay, or they have no running water, and their bathtub is just full of used toilet paper, and that could just be, I guess, a terrible housekeeper. But again, there's an environment. If their bathtub is full of used toilet paper, the rest of the house is going to probably look similar. Even if they're not doing finger painting, they still got an environmental problem there, because that's something that when we go into, they're living in it, but they're not healthy either.
Right. Yeah, and the thing too is there's other psychological disorders. People will do some odd and some strange things when they're extremely depressed. If they have social anxiety, they will do whatever it takes to stay inside that house and not have to go out in public. And even if that means if things stop working and maybe not having someone come in to fix it, or like you said, they won't allow anyone to come in maybe and help them clean, or they won't leave and clean. Does that necessarily mean they're a hoarder because the house is starting to get in that type of situation where there's a lot of stuff piling up? No. There could be a total different cause. Okay. So, yes, for someone just walking in, unless it's a very extreme case where you see items piled up, blocking walkways, blocking, the person living there or recently deceased obviously did not even have a place to sleep, or, maybe one place to sit, or you had to move stuff, could not function as a normal person can function in a house. Then, yeah, you've probably got a hoarder.
Right. So from our perspective, if law enforcement responds to a call, let's say non-deceased, but they respond to a call and they see something that's like this, or they get a 911 call, an ambulance is there and things like that. So they then should, of course, follow their protocols, but there are avenues that they can, senior services, family services, they can call and report these things to at least start the process of helping these people. And that's something that should be done, correct, from your perspective?
Most definitely, and especially if the person has, a primary care physician. I mean, that would be the best place to start. Let that primary care physician follow up with the person, and be tipped off. Okay, this is their living conditions, and then they can start asking a few questions. And if they're not comfortable, proceeding, obviously they may want to just forward it on to a psychiatrist or a psychologist and say, look, I want you to see this person ever so often. Just talk about some things. And, I haven't read where there was a hoarder and then they just miraculously were cured. However, cognitive behavioral therapy seems to do some good for some people. It's also used with PTSD, but mental disorders, it's like some diseases that we walk around with. They're not always you're able to cure them, but you're able to treat them. You're able to keep it under control. And, in that way, the person could live a normal life. But unless they know that they have a problem, why would they even go to ask for help?
Right, because they've accepted it or they have a reason for it in their mind that there's a reason for why they do what they do. So let's take this.
Right.
Let's take this to personal. Let's say there's a listener out there right now who has heard our conversation and says, I think that's my mom or my wife or my brother, or I understand that they're not just a collector; they are a hoarder, and this is going to get worse. So, what advice would we give that person to be able to deal with their loved ones from a family perspective?
Well, obviously you don't want to go and just, attack someone and just say, okay, I think you've got this problem here and we need to take care of it now. They might just start off gently. Next time they're visiting, hey, you know what? The holidays are coming up. What if we get together and we come over? We've been kind of doing some spring cleaning, at our house, or fall cleaning, whatever you want to call it. How about we come over and kind of help you get things ready, for the holidays? If the person's like, oh my gosh, that's fantastic, great, thanks, I'd appreciate that. And you go over and you're bagging up some trash, what you call trash, and they're going out the door and that person is totally okay with it, you don't have a problem. They just needed a little help house cleaning. But you get there and then all of a sudden, okay, no, I can't let go of that. No, don't move that. Don't touch that. And unless they know that, there's something going on, whether it be dementia, or some other disorder that's affecting their brain, then you can't be 100% sure. But yes, a trip to the doctor, that would definitely be in order, and let the doctor talk to them one-on-one and ask questions, not directly, but indirectly. They can start, identifying specifiers and going, oh, okay, this may be a problem, or we might have something else on our hands.
Right. Now, that's good advice. And so I think, there's probably a lot of people out there that have resonated with this conversation, that they know somebody, that then maybe they just know that they're a collector of all kinds of things. And that could be a problem as well. But, sometimes there are people that do collect a lot of things. But in our industry, in our field, when we get into these houses, it's hard for us to maneuver. It's hard for the ambulance to get somebody out. And that needs probably, especially if they're senior citizens, they can be reported to that state's, that county's Division of Senior Services, who can check on them. Because if they're by themselves and they don't have a family necessarily looking out for them, then senior services comes in and maybe can help them, because again, that's their safety. Right. That's a safety issue. And now, of course, not I'm talking about animals. I'm just talking about even if they're a collector or a hoarder, when it gets to the point that they're kind of hard to move around in their house, that's a safety issue that probably needs to be reported to someone. We've seen that on TV. Exactly. Where counties come in and give a person 90, that Hoarding TV show, which I guess I've seen it once or twice, but it's kind of, they're going to tell somebody, look, we're going to ban your house and kick you out if you don't clean it up. But I'm not suggesting we do that to somebody, but certainly there's a safety issue, and we should be looking out for their safety. If we as law enforcement, coroners, things like that, see that. The call I was on not too long ago, a lady died in a house. We had to take her out the window because there was no way we could get into her where she was at. So luckily there was a window there, and it was on the first floor, and there was another person living in the house, and and they shared this one bed, this one bedroom, and of course it was just as full. But as we're walking through and we're trying to get into the house, they're picking stuff up and moving out of the way like like a trash bag, and like garbage, like household take to the curb garbage, purely. And there was like, I'm sorry, I just got behind the last couple of weeks. I just haven't been able to catch up. You only got one room because the garbage is over my head of stuff. And I mean, they're like, man, I'm sorry for the mess. I just haven't been able to clean up. And I think they realize it's a problem, but they were comfortable living in it somehow.
Yes. Well, and it's just like we were talking earlier, like with someone with OCD. They know they have a problem, but they may have to turn that doorknob 7 or 8 times before they can walk out the door. And they know it's silly. They know that they shouldn't have to do that. But can they stop doing it on their own? No. Same way with some hoarders, Yes, especially if they say, hey, look, I just haven't had a chance, to take the garbage out. I'm so sorry for this, please just disregard. They know they have a problem. They admitted, yes, they have a problem, but can they do anything about it on their own? No.
Right.
They need help.
Right. So even though, and I am not even making this up, even though I would say garbage hasn't been taken out of that house in 5 years. I mean, I'm not even making that up. There was only one area to give into. I mean, the garbage was extensive, over my head, extensive, a path. I'm talking about garbage, rats and dogs. And I mean, it's been years since they took the trash to the curb. And they lived in that. I mean, they lived in that. And that was, that's an extreme case. But they again, feces and urine and everything all over the floor. The carpet was squishy. And I ended up, when I did my part, I ended up putting on a hazmat protective suit, a Tyvek suit to go in. I didn't want to breathe it. I didn't want to kick stuff up and breathe it and get it on me. And I mean, it was that bad. But they I guess, were comfortable in it. They might have seen it was a problem, but they psychologically somehow got comfortable in it. And I assume is what I'm hearing. You're saying they know it's wrong, but this is how we live. We're used to it, and I just don't invite anybody over type thing.
Well, and exactly. And very rarely do you have a severe disorder that you do not have some other type of disorder along with it. So, there always has to be, everybody, you always want to go, why? But why? I mean, you can but why it to death, and you can, try to find pinpoint that one particular thing. And that's the unique thing about our brains, okay? We can't always just pinpoint one particular reason as to why we are behaving a certain way. But if, like I said, they haven't been going out of the house, maybe, social anxiety. Maybe they just have a fear of going outside and dealing with people. They're okay if you come into their area. Okay, well, did they ask to be a hoarder? No, but in compensating for maybe the anxiety, the social anxiety, what did they do? They just restricted themselves to the house, and then look what they've got themselves into. Right. So, you can look at it from this perspective. Yes, it's a mental disorder in the sense of, okay, now I'm at this point. I know I have a problem, but I just can't stop.
Right.
Yes, right. They truly are crying out for help.
Right. All right. Well, I think you've really gave us a great overview of what this hoarding behavior is, against what a collector is. But again, we're going to see it, and we may not know it right off the bat. But again, now we've kind of a little bit of a better understanding. And I'm glad I was able to get you on the show, because it's something that's come up more with my cases, and others have been talking about this issue with hoarding. And so I'm glad we was able to weigh into this. Love your website, again, mindsleuth.net. And, of course, Mind Sleuth, you are all about investigative psychology. So let's just give a minute and tell us what you do as a whole. I mean, you do a lot here with your mind sleuthing. I love the website. I mean, I keep saying it, but I love it. And it's well laid out. And so, but you also do handwriting analysis and some other things as well. Tell us about that real quick.
Okay. Well, actually, mindsleuth.net is my blog site. And so I like to kind of, just pick various topics having to do with investigative psychology. My other website is my business, DosherGraphologicaLanalysis.com. I know that's a mouthful, but you can also get there, too, from Mind Sleuth, from the blog. And I have recently just finished some research that I've been working on the past 5.5, 6 years, the handwriting analysis, but it's not your typical handwriting analysis. Get this, Darren, I don't actually read the writing. I don't read the writing.
So what are you looking for?
Well, it's all quantitative. So I take a lot of measurements, and basically I am getting a time-stamped view of a person's mental processes at that moment in time, specifically deceptive versus truthful behavior. Behavior that may be truthful but under a lot of cognitive load, also known as stress and anxiety, versus deceptive that may also be under a lot of cognitive load.
Wow.
So it's groundbreaking. I'm pretty excited about it. Yeah. Did a lot of research. No one has actually done it yet besides me. So, yes, my website is starting to get quite a bit of activity, more so from Europe, though, than the U.S. I'm kind of surprised.
Right. Well, I mean, there's science behind it. Someone has to be looking at it, and I'm glad that, you started looking into that. You also, of course, assist with psychological autopsies of decedents and of crimes and things like that. But you do a lot of forensic psychological analysis. That's your main purpose, is something to do with how the mind works when it comes to crime, deception, things like that. That's your primary focus, is it not?
Exactly. Yes. I'm a former forensic scientist, so yes, I've been on quite a few crime scenes and investigated crime scenes, but I always would walk away with the same question. Why? What would make a person do this? How did this possibly come about? And yes, Darren, that's why I eventually got into the forensic psychology side, specifically investigative psychology. I'm just one of those people. I want to know why.
Right. Yeah, no, that's great. And that's what makes a good sleuth. And that's why you're a mind sleuth. But I thank you again for being on the show. There's been a wealth of information, and yes, we want to have you back, certainly, to talk about some other stuff. I'll let you go for today, but again, thank you very, very much. You have really poured into us today.
Thank you so much.
Hoarders and collectors. So, hoarders and collectors. Well, that I really learned a lot about that, because I would say half the people I know are collectors or hoarders. But maybe they're not. Maybe they're just collectors. But now I do know the difference. I do believe, however, that when you or I walk into a house, it will be hard for us to know which one it is just by looking in some cases. So you can handle them both the same. If you see something where a person's life is impeding, their environment is impeding their life, that's something that probably needs to be reported. One of the big things, though, is our safety. When you go into a house that, whether it be environmental, like feces and things like that can be a biohazard for you, or if it's maybe there's an avalanche fall or a collapse or something that could hurt us. If you're walking through a house and something falls on you, of course, then you're in danger. So watch out for that stuff. When you go into these houses, yes, we put ourselves in danger. Yes, we do go into places sometimes that others dare not to tread. But, these things are getting worse, I believe. I'm seeing more of it, and you probably are too. So just protect yourself. Just watch what is around you and take all the precautions you can. If you have any questions specific about hoarding versus collector or how that looks or whatever, drop us a line in the show notes, and we'll see if we can weigh into that. And if you have any examples, we'd love to hear from you about that as well. So remember, you can find everything to do with this show and conversation at coronertalk.com. Also, our online training, everything we have, free resources we have, the online store, everything can be found at coronertalk.com, including the link over to Death Investigation Academy. And the Death Investigation Academy, of course, is one of the largest online academies for death investigators. There's a death investigation master class there, coroner school, Medicolegal Death Investigator class. Lots of states is using that for their primary coroner training. A lot of continuing education on there, and it is growing all the time. So you can get, it's all, of course, nationally approved, ABMDI approved, standardized training, and we are quickly becoming one of a premier training site. And so I do appreciate all of you for weighing in on that and scoring us and grading us. So if you need any other specific training, virtual training, anything like that, don't hesitate to let me know. It is real easy to get a projector, a laptop, and a camcorder or a webcam. You can bring me into your facility for a couple hours to train on something or to discuss something for next to nothing, just to have a conversation. Love to do that. Love to pour into you in that way. And you save all that time and travel and money. And if we do it correctly, we can get ABMDI credits for that as long as someone is there that can be of authority to say, yes, these people were here the whole time. Now you're getting training credits, and nobody has to leave the office. So, think about that. I think it's something that has worked well in the past and will work for you.
Thanks for listening to Coroner Talk, a DSBN media production.
Visit our website at coronertalk.com.
And be sure to like us on Facebook at facebook.com/coroner training.
3617 1024 scene en route to morgue.